Hey, this is Sharon Lee, CEO of High Road Incorporated, and you're listening to the award-winning podcast, The Business Side of Music, with your host and that legend in his own mind, Bob Bender.
Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?
Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
Can we get serious now?
One thing that did happen during the 60s was some music of an unusual or experimental nature did get recorded and did get released. Now look at who the executives were in those companies at those times. Not hip young guys. These were cigar-chomping old guys who looked at the product that came and said, I don't know. Who knows what it is? Record it, stick it out. If it sells, all right. We were better off with those guys than we are now with the supposedly hip young executives who are making the decisions of what people should see and hear in the marketplace.
Success in the music business begins with a dream, a vision. This podcast will give you, the listener, the insight and tools to turn that vision into a reality. Meet the industry professionals who work day by day behind the scenes, helping to make those dreams come true. Welcome to the business side of music.
In the studio with us today, Lyn Stevens is a self-taught photographer who combines her love of photography with her passion of music. Since her days as a producer at WIBA-FM and Morning DJ and country music director for WDUX in Wisconsin, would that have been the Duck?
It was.
The Duck. Wow. Lyn has always had the bug to work in the music industry. Working in radio provided Lyn the opportunity to meet and interview legendary performers such as Merle Haggard, Ray Price, Charlie Daniels, Loretta Lynn, and the Kentucky Headhunters, among many, many others. After moving to Nashville in 2009, her photography quote-unquote hobby started catching the eye of local performers. In 2012, the door was open as Lyn was honored to have 3 of her photos on display as part of the Cameras and Community in Action project at the Frist Center for the Visual Arts. Her work went on to be featured in Country Weekly, Billboard Magazine, and the Nashville Music Guide. In 2014, she was asked by country legends Little Texas to shoot the photos for their album, Young for a Long Time, which garnered her the award for Best Visual Art at the 2015 Independent Music Awards. She added the title International Photographer to her resume after documenting a blues rock tour to Australia in 2016 and another tour to Iceland in 2018. Her work has since been on television. It's been featured in Billboard Magazine and the live telecast of the CMA Awards. Over 80 artist interviews from her radio days are now part of the audio archives at the Country Music Hall of Fame and Museum. Lyn, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's good to have you in the studio. You have a bit of a not normal music business career.
I do not. And everything I have done has been on the indie scene. I am a huge advocate of the indie scene. I believe that is where the innovators and the creators and the folks who have nothing to lose, so they take really big risks, exist. And I'm a huge advocate of that scene. I'm a part of that scene.
I honestly couldn't agree more, because I think the indie artists, like you said, they really have nothing to lose and everything to gain.
Exactly.
Being a self-taught photographer, you starting out in radio, what came first, photography or being a DJ and a music director?
Absolutely radio. I have known since the 3rd grade that I wanted to work in radio. I'm one of the few that knew very early in life what my direction was. And as I've gone into adulthood, the direction has changed quite a bit over the years. It's evolved, it's changed, but yet everything I've done has intersected, and it all comes back to my passion for music.
When did you start? Well, let me back up first, because you were at a very young age when you got the bug to be in radio.
Correct.
And how did that all start out? Because it's not like, well, anybody looking for a job in radio? Sure, I'll raise my hand.
Well, I grew up in a very small town in rural Wisconsin. My family dairy farmers. I come from a long line of dairy farmers, great-grandfather, grandfather, father. And then I have an uncle who has a farm. I had a great uncle who had a farm. I had a great aunt who had a farm. I think I had 2 great aunts with farms. I come from a long line of dairy farmers, and my family still has a dairy farm. And so my father always insisted his cows produced more milk when they listened to music. So he always had the radio going in the barn during barn chores, and we as kids were required to help with barn chores. Always little money, working hard, but little money. And so the risk was always there in the hopes of something great happening. And so I would listen to the radio, and I was introduced to the greats of Merle Haggard and Johnny Cash and all these wonderful bands I didn't know existed and artists. And as a little kid in grade school, I thought those artists were sitting in the studio talking to the radio DJ and playing live. I had no clue that it was pre-recorded music or music in the studio. And so I thought that is the greatest thing ever, to be able to sit and talk to these iconic, musicians. And that is where my deep passion for radio began. And as far as country music goes, when I was young, I really liked rock and roll. I still like rock and roll, but I had built this deep passion for country and an appreciation for the legends of country. And that began with the country scene in my mind when I was in grade school, when I heard the song All Roads Lead to You by Steve Wariner. That song just grabbed me by the throat, and I just wanted to hear it again. Back then, if you wanted to hear another song performed on the radio, you had to wait for the DJ to play it again at some point. Back then, I had no concept of how airplay worked, And so I would keep listening so I could hear the song again. And then I would record it. Then I would sit there and play back, rewind, forward, rewind, stop. And I'd write the lyrics down so that I knew what the words were. And that was the beginning. Steve Wariner's the reason why I developed a love for country music. And after I moved to Nashville, back when I worked in radio, I had the opportunity to interview him and tell him. And at the time I had said, it's a good thing that you were my role model and not Ozzy Osbourne, because I really liked Ozzy music. And then after I moved to Nashville, I think it was 2013 or so, I met him at a show at the Troubadour Theater.
Steve Wariner, not Ozzy Osbourne.
Correct. I met Steve Wariner, and I reminded him that I had interviewed him on the radio and that he was the reason I began listening to radio.
I have to go back and ask, the cows produced milk better when they listened to music. Was there a specific genre of music that they liked more than another?
My father really liked to play polkas. And in Wisconsin, the polka is the state song. And we had a local radio station, WTKM, out of Hartford, Wisconsin, that only played polkas. So he would play the polka station. And then sometimes he'd feel like country music, so then he'd listen to a country music station. My hometown had a local radio station that played traditional country music. It ended up being the first radio on-air job that I had after broadcasting school. And so then he would listen to the local station or one of the other ones.
Let's get back to you getting into radio. What was your first introduction of behind the microphone?
Behind the microphone, like I was on the mic?
Yeah.
Okay. I would say, first off, I went to broadcasting school to be a copywriter, not to be on air. I had no aspirations to be on air. So I turned down a few different job offers that were big back then because I was scared to be on the mic. I didn't want to be on the microphone. So I went for ad copy. That was my thing. And then when I turned down an on-air job, I accepted a job in my hometown at WTTN. in my hometown of Watertown, Wisconsin. And ironically, it turned out to be an on-air job. So that was my first chance behind the microphone. I had a midday show, and I was known as Severe Weather Stevens because severe weather in Wisconsin tends to happen in the afternoon hours. My shift started at 3 in the afternoon. And so whenever severe weather hit, it was always me on the air in the studio by myself, monitoring the weather and updating the public. So for the 2 years I worked there, I was Severe Weather Stevens.
What was that like that very first day that you were behind the microphone?
Incredibly scary.
Yeah.
So scary. Now I'm very comfortable behind a microphone, even though I'm not behind one regularly anymore. I'm still pretty comfortable with it. But it was so scary. And I thought, what in the world am I doing?
Moving forward to becoming a photographer. And it was a hobby for you in the beginning.
It really was. And I started out taking photos at my next full-time job, which was WDUX. And that's where I ended up moving up, had a morning job, a morning on air. I was the music director, evolved into being a music director over the years. I was there for 10 years before I moved to Nashville. And then I had a midday show on the Hot AC station. And we would be out doing live remotes. You know, the DJs who worked, we'd be out at live remotes. And I lived a few hours away from my family. First time I'd ever lived away from my family and away from home, even though it was a close drive home. It was like a 2-hour drive home. And so when I would talk to my family on the phone, telling them about what I'd been doing, where I'd been, who I'd met, they really had no concept because they'd not been up in that area really. And they just didn't know these people I was talking about. So I would start taking a camera with me, a little point and shoot, and I would start taking pictures at my live broadcasts. If I introduced someone on stage, an artist on stage, I would have someone take a photo of me on stage so I could share it with my family and say, hey, you know Jeannie Seeley from the Grand Ole Opry. You've heard her on WSM. I was able to introduce her on stage, and here's a photo of us together. Here's a photo of me on stage. I met this war hero from the military who did XYZ. Here's a photo of us. I met him at this location. This is why. Green Bay Packers are huge in Wisconsin. We sometimes had events with Green Bay Packers or with Milwaukee Brewer players. And so I'd be like, you know who so-and-so is from the television when you watch the game. This is who I was able to meet. So it started like that. And then I think it just continued when I was in Nashville, just so I could share with them, hey, this is what they look like. This is who I'm talking about. So they had a better idea of who I was talking about and see the locations that I was at that they'd never been at.
We're going to take a break, get a word in for a couple of our sponsors. And when we come back, we're going to dig in a little deeper into Lyn Stevens' career as a music industry photographer.
You're listening to the business side of music.
This is Mark Allen Barnett, singer, songwriter, creative coach, and mentor. Are you an artist or songwriter or a family member or friend of someone who is? Are you trying to find your way through the often confusing world of today's music business? I'm here to help. Over the past 40 years, I've written and recorded hit songs, have had more than my share of live performances, and have seen the ups and downs of the music industry and what Music City, also known as Nashville, has to offer. I'm here to share that information with you. The Mark Allen Barnett Songwriting Tours of Nashville are a one-day to multi-day private interactive workshops developed to help you discover your best approach to songwriting, performing in front of a live audience, along with the correct way to network within the music industry. Our workshops are based around what you need to know. While in Nashville, you get an insight from behind the scenes, learn about the history of Music City, separate fact from fiction, and give yourself or a loved one the time of your life. This workshop makes the perfect gift for someone you love who wants to get their foot in the door of the music business the right way. For more information, go to www.markallenbarnett.com or www.musicchoosesyou.com. Remember, you don't choose music. Music chooses you.
Are you a fan of 80s and 90s country? Then check out Throwback Country Music, the weekly nationwide show hosted by me, Britt Jones. I have exclusive interviews with legends and icons that include Grammy Award winners and Grand Ole Opry stars. You can listen to the show wherever you get your podcast or watch it on our YouTube channel or our Facebook page. For more info and access to these options, visit our website at throwbackcountrymusic.com. That's throwbackcountrymusic.com.
You're listening to the business side of music.
Back in the studio here in Nashville, Tennessee, Lyn Stevens is sitting across the podcast table. You have the title of international photographer. Obviously, you shot, as it says in your bio, blues rock tour in Australia and another tour to Iceland. But it didn't start there. You started to make a name for yourself to where groups like Little Texas came along and asked you to shoot the photos for their album. How do you come across that type of work in the music industry these days?
Literally, almost every single opportunity I've had has been through someone I know. And when I say that, it doesn't mean, hey, Bob, you and I met each other one day out at a networking function or at a concert, and we exchanged contact information, and we've only had that one conversation, and then one day you reach out to me via phone or email and say, Lyn, I've got this wonderful opportunity for you to come on over and take photos in a recording studio. That's not quite how it works when I say my opportunities have come through people I know. I'm a deep believer. I'm passionate when I say build, maintain, grow when it comes to relationships, networking, all of it. Any relationship, build, maintain, grow, especially in the music industry. And so when it came to Little Texas, when I moved to Nashville in 2009, I had never met them. I had never seen them in concert at that point, believe it or not. And one of my radio promotion people based in Nashville, who I had regular contact with when I worked in radio as a music director, when I moved here, she said to me, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I'd like to do promotions. I'd like to learn the artist management end of things. Ideally, I would like to get into an artist management company, even though I had no experience. You know, I thought, oh, my radio background, it'll be easier to get my foot in the door and learn from the ground up so that eventually maybe I could do promotions on a grander scale, or I could be a road manager. Those were my aspirations coming here.
Don't you find it sometimes it's really kind of a cross-pollination of ignorant bliss and being fearless at the same time?
Absolutely. You have to be fearless.
Just trying to get your foot in the door.
Absolutely. So I had been living in Nashville for 3 weeks, and I had this conversation with this radio rep of mine. And she said, you know what? A friend of mine named Dwayne is in need of some help. He wants to do a radio promotion for his band. Let me connect you two. I think you could help him because of your background with radio. And she ended up connecting me to Dwayne Probst. I called him. He is the bass player for Little Texas. And we met at a Waffle House, and he introduced me to Smothered, Covered, and Scattered, or whatever it's called. And we sat down, first meeting we ever had, and we talked about my background. We talked about what he wanted to do. At that point, Little Texas did not have a record deal anymore. They were strictly independent. They're still independent. And they had a country music Christmas single that they had wanted to get out to radio. They had recorded it several years ago prior to then. Never anything had been done with it. And he wanted to see something done with it. So over breakfast at Waffle House, we sat and we came up with a plan of action for how the two of us, with absolutely no budget, could promote the single to radio. And he had a CMA directory. He had 2 CMA directories. He gave me one. He had one. And we literally spent just under 2 weeks nonstop around the clock in our home offices, contacting every single CMA radio station and sending that single to them, just going on that directory. And at the end of it, we had contacted every CMA station at the time in that directory. And that experience in that 2-week period bonded us for life. It just bonded us for life. So
now, did he know at that time that you were a photographer?
No, because I wasn't really at that point doing it. That was the introduction to Little Texas. Yeah. And so that was right when I moved to Nashville. And so we have remained friends all of these years that I've lived in Nashville. If I have a question, like he helped me with my bio when I first wrote a bio for building a website, he helped me with that bio. A copywriter that I worked with at WDUX before I moved here also helped me with my early bio. So those 2 helped me write my early bio. It's evolved over the years and I've updated it myself. But in our friendship and my going to their shows, he's had me over the years, in the time we've known each other, come out and sell merchandise at their shows when they've had local shows.
You have worn many, many hats.
I have. And then it was, hey, later in life, 2014, I was deep into the music photography by then. And he said, would you come shoot our first album cover? It's our first album cover in 7 years. It's our first album in 7 years. Will you come shoot the album? I have the concept. I need you to help execute it. And that's how it happened over many years of knowing each other and of friendships, of going to his house for dinner, knowing his wife, knowing his child, getting to know his mother after she moved here from Texas a few years back, getting to know the band over the years from helping out with merchandise or just on my own taking photos at their shows, just supporting each other in all things that we do creatively. And that's how it's evolved.
Being a music photographer takes a special eye, though. It's not the norm. It's not like shooting wildlife I guess it is like shooting wildlife because the bands on stage can be a little bit of that way. But you're really, in a way, you're documenting their career.
Correct.
You're documenting their musical life. Do you do any research going into, or do you just, when you get there and you're shooting, you just grab whatever you can take, or a little of both? Or does that make sense to you?
No, that makes sense. And no, I don't, because usually when I'm out there, it's with someone I know. If that makes sense. Usually if I'm out shooting, it's someone I know. Or if
you already have the relationship in place.
Is something, yeah. Whether it's early or not, I usually have some sort of relationship in place. From knowing them, from going to songwriter rounds, or meeting them at networking functions, or I'm a fan and I've been to their shows. And I'm kind of different when I go to concerts in general without the camera. I probably from my radio background, but I'm very curious. I'm curious what's going on. What are the stage hands doing? What is the radio DJ doing when he comes out to announce? I'm looking at the guitar tech coming out. I'm looking at all these different things. Oh, the sound doesn't sound right. I'm looking over at the soundboard, the guy running that. Does he know what he's doing? I'm looking at the lighting people, seeing what they're doing. I'm looking at the security people. Then when the photographer comes out, where are they and where are they shooting? How are they doing this? What kind of equipment do they have? If they wander by me, I'll stop them and ask. I'm constantly in this mode of learning. And so I'm constantly watching and looking, and I'm enjoying the music, but I'm still observing all the things going on because this is the world I want to be a part of.
You're like me in the aspect of I'm always looking at the logistics.
Yes.
And how those dynamics work.
I want to understand.
Yeah, my wife when we go to a show, she's like, why aren't you watching the concert? I am watching the concert.
Yeah.
I'm watching what the lights are doing. I'm watching what the roadies running across the stage are doing.
I do all of that.
It absolutely, our brains are wired differently.
Very much different.
Than norm, I would assume. Maybe I should say, our brains are wired very much differently than the normal people.
I think so. And that's just normal for people like you and I, but it may sound strange to someone who's never heard that before.
When you approach a project where you're going to shoot film, whether it's physical or digital, do you try to, especially at a live setting, do you try to find one place to position yourself, or do you like to move around?
I like to move around.
Yeah.
I really like to move around. Now, for a lot of shows, the photographers are able to shoot right in front of the stage for the first 3 songs. So there's always that.
Which is really kind of the norm in the business.
It really is for anybody. With folks like Little Texas, when I shoot for them at local shows, I'm on stage. And I take video on stage. I like crowd shots. I like different angles. You know, the band showing the crowd in the audience. I like to have the backside of the audience to see how big it is with the band on stage. I like close-ups of the band. You know, I've shot them enough that I have a feel of what angles are most flattering for each guy in the band. When I go to songwriter rounds, I study. As I'm studying and looking and observing, I'm watching for just that one movement where they start laughing or something just extraordinary happens just by sitting and waiting. And I just sit and wait and I look.
It's catching that, I guess what you could say is that magic
moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're going to take another break, get another word in for a couple more of our sponsors. And when we come back, we're going to take a little deeper dive into Lyn Stevens and everything that she has accomplished so far.
You're listening to the business side of music.
Branding. What is it really? It goes by many names: marketing, licensing, and image. When in reality, it's 7 key branding formulas that all need to harmonize perfectly. Mess up just one formula and you have compromised the whole brand build. Dead Horse Branding facilitates all 7 formulas under one roof, building, promoting, and marketing all brands at all different stages of their level. We are a marketing team's dream, and we were built to service talent, artist managers, record labels, independent artists, iconic brands, legacy estates, and startups. Rooted in music and seated across other industries like fashion, various talent, hospitality, authors, interior designers, lifestyle brands, and corporate entities. The 7 branding formulas do not discriminate. 7 branding formulas, all in one swift movement. Sick of beating that dead horse? Come to Dead Horse. Please visit us at deadhorsebranding.com or send us an email to info@deadhorsebranding.com.
As a musician, you have a dream. That vision of what success looks like for you. Though it's not only about the money, money is a part of it. Whether you've been extremely successful or just striving to maintain a regular cash flow, you need a plan. Money Concepts can help you develop a customized plan to achieve the financial stability and success you want. For over 40 years, Money Concepts has been providing holistic financial planning services to individuals, families, and business owners. As an independent firm, Money Concepts and their associates are committed to always represent the best interest of the client. It's really about independence coupled with committed benevolent interest, which means that they can represent your client, not a product supplier. It's not about selling products. It's about helping you achieve success. To learn how this can benefit you, contact John Adams at 737-867-9309. That's 737-867-9309 for more information.
You're listening to the business side of music.
Back in the studio here in Nashville, Tennessee with Lyn Stevens, another episode of the business side of music. We touched briefly on it in the last segment or the segment before, but then during this most recent break, we dug into it a little deeper, and that is the importance of documenting your entire career, or maybe your project that you're working on, your latest and your greatest. You really like to go from inception until the end if you can. And the reason for that is...
It is so important. Now, I know when you're an indie, you're in the moment. You may be at a gig that has 50 people. Maybe it has 5 people. I've been to shows for indie artists in town that have had 5 people show up. You're still getting paid, but as a musician who thrives on the fans or the crowd reaction, it's kind of disheartening. So when you're in those kinds of moments, it might be difficult to think, I could one day be asked or inducted into a Hall of Fame somewhere. And this is where I come in and say you have to change your thinking. You have to document. I'm passionate about documenting your entire career. Not only does it help you see where you came from so you know where you're going, but it documents your personal history for your own records. And what if you are so talented and you've worked so hard that you make it big? Maybe you get a record deal. Maybe you get a publishing deal. Maybe you have a co-write with somebody who ends up blowing up, and that in turn blows your name up. What if you get to a point in your career that someone comes along and says, I'd like to induct you into this Hall of Fame. Will you have any mementos to share with them to put into an exhibit? Bob, I think this is where you, who have been inducted into a Hall of Fame, could maybe shed some more light on it.
Honestly, as you said that, I just kind of shook my head and realized that I could have gone through all the boxes that I have of photographs, and I didn't document my career very well. Mm-hmm. Here and there, little dribs and drabs. I was interviewed for a documentary film a few years back, and the documentary film was going to be on a very well-known artist that I had managed for several years. And ironically, I never had a picture taken with that artist. And that was one of the things that the producers and the director asked me, do you have a picture of you with that particular artist? And of course, I had to say no. But a lot of it was because I was just too busy to ask. And also, I didn't feel comfortable asking for whatever reason back then. But that was an important part of my career that didn't get documented. Now, I have pictures of my old garage band days and my nightclub days when I had bands. But that's just the very early stages. And there's this big gaping hole, black hole, between those and what I've accomplished maybe in the last 10 years or so.
And did you ever, when you started out in the music business, did you ever in your wildest dreams think you would be inducted into a Hall of Fame?
I did not. Absolutely. In fact, when I was inducted, it was a shock. And the same thing happened there. They asked me for video footage and stills that they could run leading up to my induction. And once again, I really had nothing to give them. And it was a conundrum of sorts. It really was.
It's sad. And I'm in the same boat with my radio days. I have this huge black hole that was not documented. I documented the artists that I interviewed. I documented if I introduced them on stage. I documented some of the folks that I met along the way when I was out broadcasting live. But I have 3 photos. In 15 years of radio experience, I have 3 photos of me sitting in a in the recording studio, in the radio studio. 3.
That's 1 for every 5 years. And you obviously accomplished a lot in that 15 years.
From interns to part-time work to, my first full-time job to my next job to the job I was fired from because, there's this long storied history in that time and there are no pictures.
Yeah.
So I'm very passionate about this, whether you think it's important or not, if you're in the moment or not. As creatives, we're stuck in our heads more times than not. And when you're in the moment trying to make something happen when you're trying to make nothing into something. You don't think what you're doing is important, but the big picture, as you progress, it's important. And I encourage people who are not doing this to please start.
You mentioned an artist that you worked with in the studio and documenting that aspect of it. There were several layers. You were really attempting to find out what it was all about. Was this a vanity project, or what were we documenting?
What was the end game? What was the end game for this album being recorded? Why are you spending money in the studio? Is it a vain project just so you can say, hey, I'm a musician and I have something recorded? And that's okay if that's what it is. A lot of people do that. Is it, I'm out there with paid gigs and I need something to help bring in extra money. I need them to, the folks who come to my shows to be able to buy something that they can take home that's tangible. That's great. Is it you need something so you can send out an EPK to a festival that you're hoping to apply for, and you need to send them some information? Do you want to get on the music charts? Do you want a Grammy nomination? These are all things you have to think about. And in that case, his answer was all of the above, but he thought I was a little crazy thinking Grammy nomination. He's like, not very many people know who I am.
But you don't know.
You don't know. So when he decided, yes, I would love a Grammy nomination, and I said, I really believe in this music. I think it's strong enough. But I'm an independent. I don't even know how to do that. Do you? And I'm like, no, let's research it. So this is where you come into networking, brainstorming, get your friends together and brainstorm. We did it in radio, whether it was, hey, let's come up with a catchy, creative commercial, or for a radio promotion. Do it with your friends. Get together, or people you know who have maybe applied for Grammys before. Ask your people in your circle, do you know anybody, or do you have information? How do I get it? How do I go through the steps? We researched, and what we came up with was this album is going to go somewhere, and it's more than the knowledge that we have that we can put into it. We had kind of tapped out at that point with our knowledge of what to do with this album for promotions on our own, for budgeting and everything else. So we started searching for a tried and true publicist who had experience with that kind of music. And then we had meetings with them and ended up, the artist hired one specifically just for this album. It was a one-time album hire. And that publicist was the biggest blues rock publicist in the country. She believed in the music and she took the project on. And she was able to submit the album, the final product, and walk us through the Grammy nomination, the Grammy submission steps. She was able to submit for us, and I say us because I was part of the project, but it was for the artist. And he did make it onto the Grammy entry ballot, which I think is huge.
Because how many don't make it even that far?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know the process for the Grammys, but this was my first walk into all this. And through the publicist, he was able to get submitted, and he made it to the Grammy entry. And he's still a very much relatively unknown name, not nationally known. And he was able to do that because he changed his mindset after that conversation in the studio of what is your end game? What are your intentions for this album? When we started talking, yes, Grammy nomination, the whole mindset was flipped, and every single session in that studio, every single person in the band, everyone knew this is for Grammy nomination. And it changed everything.
It does change the dynamics,
doesn't it? It really does. And when that album came out, with the help of the publicist, it debuted with multiple songs in the top 50. I think it was 6 songs in the top 50 on the Blues Roots charts, which is an independent chart, but very important. And it eventually had a number 1 single, and the album became number 1. It went number 1. I think those are all huge, huge accomplishments for an unknown independent artist. And so the moral of the story here, if you think nobody cares, all you have to do, whether you're a big name or a no name, and when I say no name, I mean you're not yet established and well known outside of where you primarily play and network. And if you give people a reason to care, they will care. And if you work hard and you showcase that you're the real deal, you're willing to work hard, you're talented, and you're networking, building, maintaining, and growing relations, you too can get on the Grammy nomination ballot. I mean, it's just, or the entry ballot, or have a #1 album. You don't have to have a record deal. You don't have to have a huge budget. You can do a lot on your own with hard work.
And so much of this is networking.
It really is.
So
it's about
much,
community and networking.
And having relationships.
Absolutely.
And building that. And I'm still, to this day, when I go to a conference or a convention, I'm one of those old school guys. I'll still carry business cards with me. So many people have got the QR code on their phone now. And that's nice, but, as soon as I scan that, I'm going to forget who you are.
Correct.
But if I have a business card, I can write on the back of it, this is where I met them. They were in this booth, or we were at this event. And when I get home, I put it in my stack of other business cards, which literally goes into the hundreds to this day.
So I take it one step further than that, because I'm awful with names. I know faces. I know voices. I'm terrible with names. So I will make sure I get a picture of that person. And then I will take a picture of them with their business card, so that after they're out of sight, out of mind, because I've talked to 50 more people or 100 more people at a conference or at a networking event, and I've forgotten, oh man, I want to reach out to that person. Who was it again? Who was that? What was that name, and who are they affiliated with? I can go back through my photos on my phone and I go, okay, this is who that person is, and this is who I need to follow up with.
Being an indie artist with a zero budget, we see that so much these days. The artist that's out there that's trying to make it and break through the wall, and they don't have a budget. How do you work with someone like that?
I feel like this is my life story. I grew up on a dairy farm, never really much money, a lot of hard work. Was in radio. A lot of hard work with hardly ever a budget. I always say that pretty much everything I have ever done, I learned from radio. And I was in secondary radio where there really wasn't a budget. So you had to be creative to make things work. And I've carried that through with everything I do in Nashville. And I believe you can have traction with your career without having money. You have to be willing to work. Someone you meet at a networking function isn't just going to knock on your door one day and say, hey, I remember meeting you and I think you're great and I want to give you this opportunity. It doesn't work that way. You have to build, maintain, and grow. Once again, I'm going to keep saying those words: build, maintain, and grow with your network and community. And you can be your own publicist. You can be your own booking agent, be your own information gatherer, be your own Google search expert. Sometimes I'm not good at the Google search, but you can do things like book your own shows. If you don't live in Nashville, say you live in a different part of the area, a different part of the country, in a different country. If there is a certain city or town that you would like to perform at, you can get on Google, become a Google expert, and start researching what clubs cater to your genre of music in that area. And then look at the websites, look at the contact, find out, research. You can usually find it if you dig deep enough and are patient enough online to find who the contact is. Reach out to them, send them an email, because by phone, clubs usually don't show up for work till late afternoon. So send emails. Call after the club is open. Say, this is my music. This is who I am. I'm interested in performing in your area and I'm interested in your club. Can I please have an opportunity to perform? You can do those things. It's hard work. I don't like booking in any capacity. But I know lots of independent artists on the Nashville scene who do that every single day, and they have successful careers as musicians where it is the only job they have, and they're relatively unknown.
And keeping those names in a database.
Yes.
Keeping those names.
Spreadsheets.
Yeah. That is so important. So you're not, as you said, going, who is that person now and how do I reach out to them?
Exactly.
The more information you have, the better armed you are.
Exactly. And I know for here in Nashville, but you can look in the community where you live, the state where you live. There are different online resources where you can post your gig or whatever it is your event is that you're a part of. You can post it online for free.
I know I've seen several events that I've been invited to and need to get a ticket.
Yes.
And you go through eventbrite.com, but a lot of times there's no charge for the ticket. It's just a way for them
to track how many people are going to come.
Right, how many people are coming. And of course they're gathering some information. And I'm glad to give them my email address if that's what it takes. But it's smart business. It really is.
I think it is too. And then if you do have a little extra money, now keep in mind anything that you spend can be used as a tax write-off on your taxes each year. And there, at least here in Nashville, and I'm sure there are in other places of the country, look in your community what's available. But there are some really wonderful organizations in Nashville for a very minimal fee. All of these that I'm going to share are under $100. In my earlier days in Nashville, I went to a lot of networking events. I went to every networking event I could get my hands on. And I met a guy named Logan who was a recent Belmont graduate. And he had this idea and he told me about it at an indie network event. He said, I'm going to start this indie music startup that's going to help indies with all aspects of the business and learning it. And I said, that sounds great. A few years later, he was still in early startup phase. It was the very first event that I sponsored. I, at that point, was making enough money as a music photographer that when someone reached out and said, hey, we're having this event, can you be a sponsor? I actually could afford to. Logan was a sponsor as well at that event, and we talked more. But he started a program in Nashville. I think they're still based in East Nashville, called HOME, H.O.M.E. It's an acronym for helping our music evolve. And HOME has evolved quite a bit over the years since Logan started it. And it's a nominal fee, and it's like this entrepreneurship, being immersed around people with the same mind frame of what they're trying to do, like-minded people, from recording to gigging, to photography, to all these different aspects of the business. And you can go there. It's just an amazing program. Just look it up.
Yeah.
Seriously.
I've attended some of their events, and it is one of a kind, literally.
Logan's amazing.
Yep. Here's a shout out to our loyal listeners. Without all of you, we wouldn't be one of the most listened to music industry interview podcasts, including achieving #1 status in many countries around the world, according to Apple Podcasts. If you enjoy our show, please check out our Facebook page at the Business Side of Music Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and definitely hit the like button. While you're at it, go to our page on YouTube and click on the Business Side of Music Podcast to subscribe. Also, special thanks to Sennheiser Microphones for supplying us with some top-notch gear for our use here in the studio. It's always appreciated to receive such support. Last but not least, check us out and follow us on X, used to be called Twitter, at Biz Music Podcast. That's BIZ Music Podcast. Lynn, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I have enjoyed this.
The Business Side of Music is the creation of Tom Sabella and Tracy Snow and is produced by Bob Bender. The Business Side of Music is recorded at Music Dog Studios in Nashville, Tennessee. Production sound design by Keith Stark. Voiceover and promo by Lisa Fuson.